Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It waits beneath your feet until you're ready to hear it. The house had been silent for years, or at least that's what Caleb Mercer believed when he first stepped inside, drawn not by hope, but by the absence of it. A place far enough from everything that even memories seemed to lose their way. Tucked deep in the northern woods where the wind moved slow through tall pines, and the nearest town sat nearly 15 miles down a narrow, forgotten road, a place no one stumbled upon by accident. And maybe that was exactly why he chose it, because after everything he had lost, silence felt safer than anything that could speak back. And yet on the third night, just as the last glow of the fireplace faded into a dull orange whisper, he heard it. Not loud, not sudden, but deliberate, a low, hollow sound rising from beneath the floorboards like the house itself had taken a breath, slow and measured, as if something below was still alive and remembering how to be heard. And before Caleb even moved, before his mind could reach for reason, Shadow was already awake. The German shepherd lifting his head from the worn rug with ears sharpened toward the ground, his amber eyes fixed not on the door, not on the windows, but on a single spot near the center of the room. And there was something in that stillness that felt different, not fear, not warning, but recognition, as if the dog had been waiting for this moment long before Caleb ever arrived. The sound came again, faint but steady, spaced out in a rhythm too precise to belong to wind or settling wood. And Caleb found himself counting without thinking, 1, 2, 3, 27. And there it was again, that same low pulse beneath the boards, and something about that number tightened quietly in his chest. Not panic, not yet, just a memory brushing against the edge of awareness, the kind that doesn't ask permission before it returns. He sat up slowly, the old couch creaking under his weight, boots resting heavy against the wooden floor as he listened, really listened, the way he had learned to years ago when silence meant survival. Shadow stood now, not barking, not pacing, just stepping forward with careful precision until his paw rested lightly against the exact place where the sound seemed to rise. And then he tapped once, soft, deliberate, and looked back at Caleb, not confused, not uncertain, but patient, like he was waiting for Caleb to finally catch up to something he already understood. The fire behind them cracked quietly, sending a brief flicker of light across the room, shadows stretching along the walls like something shifting just out of sight, and Caleb exhaled. Slowly, running a hand over his face as the sound came again, steady, unchanging, too exact to ignore. This wasn't just a house settling. It wasn't pipes or wind or anything that could be explained away with daylight. This was something else, something buried, something that had been waiting long before he ever walked through that door. And as Shadow remained still, eyes locked on that single point beneath the floor, Caleb realized the silence he had come here for was never truly empty. It had just been hiding something deeper, something patient, something that didn't need to shout to be heard. Caleb did not move right away, not because he was afraid, but because something in him recognized the weight of that moment, the way a man recognizes the first drop of rain before a storm he cannot yet see. His eyes followed Shadow's steady gaze to the floor, to that single place where would met something unseen beneath it, and the sound came again, low and measured, like a distant heartbeat that refused to fade. 27 seconds, always 27. He whispered the count under his breath. Without meaning to, the habit carved into him years ago when timing was the difference between certainty and uncertainty. And for a long second, he just listened, letting the silence stretch around the rhythm, trying to decide whether this was something he could walk away from or something that had already chosen him. Shadow tapped the floor again, softer this time, then lowered his head closer, nostrils flaring as if he could smell something buried deep below the layers of wood and dust. And time. There was no panic in him, no urgency, just a quiet insistence that felt almost human. And that was what unsettled Caleb the most, not the sound itself, but the calm way the dog accepted it, as if it belonged here, as if it had always been part of this place. Caleb stood slowly, the boards creaking under his boots as he stepped closer, each step measured, deliberate, until he was standing where Shadow had been pointing all along. He crouched, pressing his palm flat against the floor, and there it was, faint but undeniable, a vibration that moved through the wood in a steady pulse, not random, not shifting, but controlled, like something designed to repeat. His fingers traced along the seams of the planks, feeling for anything out of place, any sign that this floor was not as solid as it appeared. The fire behind him flickered again, casting a thin band of light across the boards, and for just a moment, he saw it, a subtle difference in the grain, a line too straight to be natural. Running just along the edge of where his hand rested, he shifted his weight, pressing harder, and one of the boards gave slightly beneath the pressure, not enough to break, just enough to confirm what he was beginning to understand. This was not just a floor, it was a cover. Shadow stepped back, giving him space, but his eyes never left that spot. His tail still, his body quiet. Watching, waiting, Caleb reached for the edge of the board, his fingers slipping into the narrow gap, and pulled, slowly at first, testing resistance. Then with more force as the wood lifted with a dry, reluctant sound, revealing darkness beneath, not empty space, but something deeper, colder, a pocket of air that had not been touched in years, maybe decades. A faint chill rose from below, carrying with it a scent that was not quite earth and not quite metal, something older, something sealed away. Caleb paused, his hand resting on the edge of the opening, listening again as the sound came once more, clearer now, less muffled, still counting out that same precise interval, 27 seconds, always the same. And as he stared into that narrow gap, he realized something that settled deep into his chest with a quiet certainty. This was never about a noise. It was about a signal, and whatever was beneath this house was not just making sound. It was waiting for someone to hear it. Shadow lowered himself beside the opening, placing his head gently near the edge, not afraid, not hesitant, just present, like a silent partner who had already accepted whatever came next. And Caleb, after a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of everything he had tried to leave behind, reached for his flashlight, because some things, once they begin, do not stop until someone is willing to see them through. The beam of Caleb's flashlight cut through the darkness like a thin blade, revealing a narrow space beneath the floor that seemed less like a crawl space and more like something intentionally built, the light catching on smooth surfaces instead of dirt, on edges that felt measured rather than natural. And as he lowered himself closer, the air shifted, cooler and heavier, carrying a stillness that had not been disturbed in years, maybe longer. The sound came again, no longer muffled by wood, now clearer, deeper, a steady pulse that echoed softly off whatever lay below. 27 seconds, always the same. Caleb angled the light further in and saw it then, not all at once, but in fragments, a metal surface dulled by time, a corner of something squared and deliberate, and just beyond it, the faint outline of what looked like a ladder descending into darkness, not a makeshift one, but something bolted into place, designed to be used, designed to last. Shadow leaned in beside him, his breath slow and even, his ears flicking with each pulse of the sound, not startled, not uncertain, just aware, as if each vibration carried meaning he could already read. Caleb exhaled slowly, the decision forming not in his mind, but somewhere deeper, the same place that once told him when to move and when to wait, and this time it told him clearly. This was not something to ignore. He set the flashlight between his teeth for a moment and gripped the edge of the opening, pulling himself up just enough to shift his weight, then reached down, testing the first rung of the ladder with his boot. It held firm, cold metal against worn leather, steady and unmoving. He paused there, halfway between the known and whatever waited below, listening again, feeling the rhythm in his chest now as much as in the floor, and for a brief second, a memory surfaced, not sharp, not complete, just a feeling of standing somewhere else, long ago, counting the seconds between signals, waiting for something that never came in time. He closed his eyes, letting the moment pass without holding on to it, because this was different. This was not about what he had lost. This was about what had been left behind. Shadow moved closer, placing one paw on the edge of the opening, his body angled forward, ready, not rushing, just present. Caleb gave a small nod, more to himself than to the dog, and began his descent, one rung at a time, the wood floor above fading into shadow as the beam of light followed him down, the walls around him narrowing into a confined shaft lined with metal, the air growing stiller with each step, until his boots touched solid ground again. The space opened just enough for him to stand upright. And when he lifted the flashlight, the room revealed itself slowly, not all at once, but piece by piece, like something remembering how to be seen. A compact chamber, no wider than 10 feet across, its walls reinforced with aged panels, cables running along the edges, and at the center, mounted against the far wall, a machine still quietly alive, its surface worn but intact, a small indicator light blinking faintly in sync with the sound, each pulse measured, deliberate, untouched by time. Caleb stepped forward, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by the undeniable sense that this was never meant to be forgotten, that someone had built this with intention, with purpose, and that purpose had not yet ended. Shadow climbed down behind him, landing softly, his paws silent against the floor as he moved beside Caleb, his gaze fixed on the machine, his ears tilting slightly with each pulse, as if listening to something beneath the sound itself. Caleb reached out slowly, his hand hovering just inches from the surface of the device, feeling the faint vibration radiating from it, steady and patient, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. And in that quiet underground room, with the world above, reduced to nothing more than distant memory, Caleb understood something he could not yet explain. This was not just a remnant of the past. It was a message, one that had been repeating for years, waiting for someone willing to listen long enough to finally hear what it was trying to say. Caleb did not touch the machine right away, not because he feared it, but because something about its persistence demanded respect, the way a man pauses before opening a letter he already knows will change something inside him. The faint blinking light continued its quiet rhythm, casting a soft glow across the metal surface, and with each pulse, the low hum filled the room in a way that felt almost intentional, as if the space itself had been shaped around that sound. Shadow moved closer, his nose hovering inches from the device, not sniffing wildly but studying it, his head tilting slightly as though he could hear something layered beneath the pulse, something deeper than vibration alone. Caleb lowered himself to one knee, bringing his eyes level with the machine, and began to take it in piece by piece. The casing was old but well made, industrial, with bolts that had not rusted through and seams that had been sealed carefully. Wires ran from the back into the wall, disappearing into conduits that suggested power was still somehow being drawn from somewhere beyond this room. A small panel on the front displayed a sequence of faint markings, numbers worn thin by time, and beneath them, a narrow slot, no wider than a finger, like something meant to receive or release a message. The sound came again, steady, patient, and Caleb found himself counting without thinking, 1 through 27, then the pulse. Always the same, always exact. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the surface of the metal, and felt the vibration more clearly now, not harsh, not mechanical in the way modern machines felt, but almost organic, like something built to mimic life rather than replace it. And that was when he noticed it, a small switch set into the side, partially hidden beneath a layer of dust, not labeled, not obvious, but there, waiting. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering just above it, because some part of him understood that this was a line, a point where observation would become action, where listening would turn into response. Shadow let out a low, soft exhale, not a warning, not a protest, just a presence, steady and grounding. And Caleb realized the dog was not telling him to stop. He was telling him to be ready, the kind of readiness that did not come from knowing what would happen, but from accepting that something would. He flipped the switch, gently, without force, and for a brief second, nothing changed. The light continued to blink, the hum continued its rhythm, but then the sound shifted, not louder, not faster, but different, as if something had acknowledged the change. The pulse stretched slightly, the space between each vibration lengthening just enough to be noticed, and then, beneath it, another layer emerged, faint at first, almost lost in the background, a soft crackle, like an old radio trying to find a signal. Caleb leaned closer, his breath steady, his focus narrowing, and then he heard it. Not words, not yet, but a pattern within the noise, something structured, something repeating in a way that was too precise to be random. Shadow's ears lifted higher, his body still as stone, his eyes fixed on the machine as if he had been waiting for this exact moment, and Caleb felt a quiet certainty settle over him. This was not just a device left behind. It was something that had been waiting to be activated, waiting for a presence, waiting for someone to finally listen not just to the sound, but to what lived beneath it. And as the faint crackle continued to form into something more defined, Caleb understood that whatever message this place had been holding on to for all these years, it was finally beginning to surface, not because time had passed, but because someone had finally chosen to stay and hear it through. The faint crackle grew steadier, no longer a scattered noise, but something gathering itself, like a voice remembering how to speak after years of silence. Caleb leaned closer, his hand still resting lightly against the cool metal, feeling the rhythm beneath his fingertips as the machine continued its slow pulse. And then, between the static, a sound formed, fragile at first, almost lost, but unmistakably human. A breath, drawn in and released through time, stretched thin but still present. Shadow's ears lifted higher, his body unmoving. As if he understood the weight of what was happening before Caleb could fully grasp it, the crackle shifted again, tightening into something clearer, and then the voice came, soft, aged by distortion, but steady in its intent, each word spaced carefully, as though it had been recorded by someone who knew it might be heard long after they were gone. Caleb did not move, did not interrupt. He simply listened, the way he had been taught to listen when every detail mattered. The voice spoke slowly, not rushed, not panicked, but deliberate, as if it had been crafted with care, and though the words were not yet fully clear, the tone carried something deeper than meaning. It carried presence, the undeniable sense that someone had once stood in this very room, breathing this same air, leaving behind something meant to endure. The machine pulsed again, 27 seconds, and the voice followed, stronger now. Pushing through the static, Caleb's chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from recognition, not of the person, but of the moment itself, the kind that sits quietly at the edge of memory until it finds a way back. Shadow stepped closer, pressing lightly against Caleb's side, grounding him in the present, reminding him that he was not alone in this. The light above flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale glow across the chamber as the voice continued to form, word by word, clearer with each cycle, as if the machine was rebuilding the message piece by piece. Caleb closed his eyes for a brief second, letting the sound settle, letting the rhythm guide him. And when he opened them again, something had shifted inside him, the distance he had carried for so long, the quiet barrier between himself and everything else, began to soften, not completely, not all at once, but enough to let this moment in. The voice was no longer just a signal. It was a connection, a thread reaching across years, across silence, across everything that had been left unsaid. And as Caleb listened, really listened, he realized this was not about discovering something hidden. It was about receiving something that had been waiting, patiently, for someone willing to stay long enough to hear it fully. The machine pulsed again, steady as ever, but now it felt different, not like a question, but like an answer slowly revealing itself. And in that quiet underground room, with Shadow beside him and the voice beginning to take shape in the stillness, Caleb understood that whatever had been left here was never meant to be lost. It was meant to find its way back, one listener at a time. The voice steadied with each passing cycle, no longer breaking apart between pulses but flowing in a slow, deliberate cadence, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment to be heard clearly. Caleb leaned closer, his breath quiet, his focus absolute, and the words began to separate themselves from the static, forming something tangible, something real, not just sound but intention carried across time. The tone was calm, measured, not filled with fear or urgency, but with a quiet certainty that settled into the room like a presence that refused to fade. Shadow remained beside him, unmoving except for the subtle rise and fall of his chest, his ears tracking every shift in the sound, his body aligned with the rhythm, as if it spoke a language he had always understood. Caleb felt something shift deep inside him, a memory not yet clear but pressing forward, the way a name lingers just beyond reach. The voice continued, clearer now, each word placed carefully, as though it had been recorded by someone who knew they would not be there to explain it later, someone who trusted that one day, someone else would listen long enough to understand. Caleb's hand tightened slightly against the metal surface, feeling the steady vibration beneath his palm, and with each pulse, the connection grew stronger. The distance between past and present narrowing until it no longer felt like two separate moments, but one continuous thread. The voice paused briefly, not breaking, just allowing the silence between words to carry its own meaning. And in that pause, Caleb felt it, not in his ears but in his chest, a recognition that did not come from logic, but from something deeper, something tied to who he had been before the quiet took over his life. Shadow shifted slightly, pressing closer, his presence steady, unwavering, and Caleb understood that the dog had not just sensed the sound, he had recognized its importance, had known from the beginning that this was not something to ignore. The voice returned, stronger now, no longer fragile, and though the words were still forming, their meaning began to take shape, not as a message of urgency, but as something more enduring, something meant to be found, not in haste, but in patience. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle fully, letting the rhythm guide him. And when he opened them again, the room felt different, not changed, but revealed, as though it had been waiting for this moment to become what it was always meant to be. The machine pulsed again, steady, faithful, and Caleb realized that this was not just a recording left behind. It was a bridge, a way for something unfinished to reach forward, to find someone willing to listen, someone willing to stay. And as the voice continued to emerge from the static, clearer with every passing second, Caleb understood that whatever this message held, it was not meant for just anyone. It was meant for the one who chose not to walk away, the one who stayed long enough to hear the truth hidden beneath the silence. And for the first time in a long while, Caleb did not feel like he was searching for something. He felt like something had finally found him. The voice no longer struggled to exist within the static. It carried itself now with a quiet strength, each word landing with intention, as if time had not diminished it, but refined it. And Caleb felt the shift immediately, not just in what he heard, but in what he understood. The message was no longer forming. It was arriving, complete in its purpose. The tone held something familiar, something steady and grounded. The kind of voice that had once carried instruction, reassurance, presence in moments when silence was too heavy to bear alone. Caleb's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the slow recognition of something that had been buried deeper than memory, something he had not allowed himself to revisit. Shadow remained still, his eyes fixed forward, his ears tuned with a focus that bordered on reverence, as if he understood that this was not just sound, but something that deserved to be heard fully. The machine pulsed again, and the voice followed, clearer now, each word threading itself into meaning that no longer needed to be guessed. Caleb leaned closer, his hand pressing more firmly against the metal, grounding himself in the present as the past reached toward him. The voice spoke with a calm certainty, not asking, not pleading, but offering, as if it had been left behind with the hope that one day, someone would be ready to receive it. And in that moment, Caleb realized something that settled deep within him. This was not a random message, not a forgotten signal lost to time. It had a direction, a purpose, a destination, and somehow, impossibly, that destination had become him. The thought did not feel overwhelming. It felt quiet, almost natural, like stepping into a place that had been waiting for him long before he knew it existed. The air in the chamber seemed to shift slightly, not moving, but deepening, as if the space itself was holding the moment, allowing it to unfold without interruption. The voice continued, and now there was no mistaking it. The words carried weight, not just from what they said, but from what they held beneath them, something unfinished, something that had been waiting to be completed. Caleb's mind flickered with fragments of memory, not clear images, but impressions, a sense of standing somewhere else, listening to a voice through noise, counting seconds, waiting for a signal that never came. And now here he was, years later, standing in a place where a signal had never stopped, where something had continued to reach out long after it should have faded. Shadow shifted slightly, his shoulder brushing against Caleb's leg, a small gesture, but enough to anchor him fully, to remind him that he was here, that this was real. And Caleb understood then that this moment was not about the past alone. It was about what could still be done, what could still be answered. The voice paused again, not ending, just allowing space, as if waiting for acknowledgement, for presence, for someone to not just hear, but to understand. And Caleb, standing there in the quiet pulse of that hidden room, realized that listening was not enough. Whatever had been left here was asking for something more, not in urgency, not in demand, but in quiet expectation, the kind that trusts the right person will know what to do when the time comes. And as the next pulse echoed softly through the chamber, Caleb did not feel like a man uncovering a mystery anymore. He felt like a man being entrusted with something that had waited far too long to be forgotten. The next pulse carried the voice with a clarity that no longer left room for doubt, each word now distinct, shaped with intention. And as Caleb listened, something inside him finally aligned, not in a sudden realization, but in a slow, undeniable understanding that settled into place like a piece long missing. The message was not just being heard, it was being delivered. The voice spoke not with urgency, but with quiet resolve, as though it had accepted the passage of time and chosen to remain. Anyway, waiting, trusting, believing that someone would come, someone who would not turn away. Caleb's breath slowed, his focus narrowing to nothing but the sound, the rhythm, the meaning unfolding before him. And then it happened. A name surfaced within the message, spoken softly but with unmistakable clarity. A name Caleb had not heard in years, not spoken aloud, not even in memory. And yet it struck him with a precision that left no room for denial. His hand tightened slightly against the metal, the vibration beneath it now feeling less like a machine and more like a connection, a bridge between what was and what still remained. Shadow shifted closer, pressing firmly against Caleb's leg, not in fear, not in uncertainty, but in recognition, as if the dog understood the weight of that name even without knowing its history. Caleb's thoughts moved quickly now, not scattered, but focused, tracing back through time to a moment he had sealed away, a place where signals had been missed, where silence had taken something it should not have. And now here, in this hidden room beneath a forgotten house, that silence was being answered. The voice continued, and within it, there was no blame, no regret, only a quiet message left behind, something meant to reach forward rather than look back, something that did not ask why, but simply existed to be found. Caleb felt the weight of it settle into him, not as a burden, but as something else entirely, something that carried purpose, the kind that does not demand action, but invites it. Shadow lowered himself beside Caleb, his head resting gently against his knee, his presence steady, grounding, a silent reminder that this moment was not about what had been lost, but about what could still be done. The machine pulsed again, but now it felt different, not like a call waiting to be answered, but like something nearing completion. The voice softened slightly, as though reaching the end of what it had been holding on to all these years, and Caleb understood that this was not just a discovery. It was a responsibility, not one forced upon him, but one that had found him because he had chosen to stay, because he had listened when it would have been easier to walk away. The final words of the message settled into the room with a quiet certainty, and as the sound began to fade back into the steady pulse, Caleb did not feel the need to chase it, to hold on to it, because he knew now that it had already given him what it was meant to give. The rest was not in the machine, it was in him, in what he chose to do next. And as he sat there in the stillness, with Shadow beside him and the faint rhythm continuing beneath his hand, Caleb realized that some messages are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried forward, completed not by understanding alone, but by the quiet decisions that follow. Caleb did not rush to leave the room, not because he needed more answers, but because something within him understood that this moment deserved stillness, the kind that allows meaning to settle without being forced. The machine continued its steady pulse, but the voice had faded, leaving behind only the quiet rhythm that had carried it all this way. And now, without the words, the sound felt different, no longer reaching, no longer waiting, but resting, as if it had completed what it was meant to do. Shadow remained close, his body relaxed now, his head resting gently against Caleb's leg. The tension that once held him alert now softened into something calm, something resolved. Caleb exhaled slowly, the weight he had carried for so long shifting, not disappearing, but changing shape into something he could finally hold without turning away. He looked at the machine one more time, the faint light blinking in its steady pattern, and for a moment, he considered leaving it as it was, letting it continue its quiet work beneath the world above. But then he understood that some things are not meant to repeat forever. Some things are meant to be heard, understood, and then allowed to rest. He reached out, his hand steady, and found the switch again. The same one that had awakened the voice, and with a gentle motion, he turned it back, not with hesitation, but with quiet certainty. The pulse slowed, the light dimmed, and then, for the first time since he had arrived, the room fell into complete silence, not empty, not hollow, but full in a way that only true silence can be, the kind that follows after something has finally been heard. Caleb sat there for a long moment, letting that silence settle around him, letting it move through him, until it no longer felt unfamiliar, but right. Shadow lifted his head slightly, his ears relaxed, his eyes soft, and Caleb knew without needing to question that the dog felt it too, that whatever had been waiting here was no longer waiting. He stood slowly, his joints stiff from the time spent in stillness, and turned toward the ladder, the beam of his flashlight tracing the path upward, back toward the world above. Each step carried a different weight now, not lighter, but steadier, as if something within him had found its balance again. Shadow followed close behind, his movement quiet and sure, and when they reached the opening, Caleb paused, looking back once more into the dim space below, not searching, not questioning, just acknowledging. Then he climbed out, pulling himself onto the wooden floor, the cool air of the cabin greeting him like something new. The fire had burned low, leaving only a soft glow that barely lit the room, and yet everything felt clearer, more defined. As if the silence above had learned something from the silence below, Shadow stepped out beside him, stretching once before settling near the place where the floor had been opened, but now there was no urgency. In him, no need to signal or guide, just a quiet presence that matched the calm in the room. Caleb replaced the board carefully, setting it back into place as though closing something that did not need to be opened again, not forgotten, just complete. He stood there for a moment, listening. But there was no sound beneath his feet, no pulse, no echo, just stillness, and for the first time in a long while, that stillness did not feel empty. It felt earned. Caleb moved to the window, looking out at the dark stretch of trees, the night air still and quiet, and he realized that he had not come here to disappear. Not really. He had come here because something in him had known there was still something left to hear, something left to carry forward, and now that he had heard it, truly heard it, he did not feel the need to run from the silence anymore. He felt ready to live within it. Shadow joined him at the window, sitting close, his gaze steady on the horizon, and Caleb rested a hand gently on the dog's head, not as a command, not as a habit, but as a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had walked through together. And as the first hint of morning began to soften the edges of the sky, Caleb understood something simple and certain. Some truths do not come to change the past. They come to finally set it at rest. And in that quiet cabin, with no sound beneath the floor and no weight left unspoken, he allowed himself, for the first time in years, to simply stand still and breathe.